Welcome to Real Talk episode 18. I'm Brian Rose and you're here at London Real Studios, and joining me is my good friend, Mr. Max Keiser, who's the host of the Keiser Report on RT here in London, and he tours the world with his lovely bride, Stacy. They both live next door to London Real Studios, I know.
We hear you making a racket all the time. And I came over here to find out what all the noise is about, and now I'm on the show.
Max is a cryptocurrency advocate. He's the founder of StartJoin crowdfunding company, the creator of MaxCoin, the creator of StartCoin, and also the Bitcoin Capital Fund. He's about to celebrate his 1,000th episode this year of the Keiser Report. I was a guest on the Keiser Report in January last year. It was a big moment. Thank you, Max, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Finally, Brian Rose. I finally got down to the list of people to have on the show. My name finally has come up. So, yeah, fantastic.
I remember when you first came here, you and I were having a Twitter battle back and forth about Bitcoin, because I was like, who can come on and drop science about Bitcoin? And we were going back and forth. And finally, like an email came over, and you're like, when and where? in typical Keiser fashion, which means lowercase, no punctuation, could give a fuck. And he was like,
a lot of ellipses.
A lot of ellipses.
Yeah.
And he said
hyphens.
Hyphens. And you're like, when and where? And I was like, that. And you're like, I'll be there. And I didn't know if you were going to come in and take a shot at me. And you came on. We had Alessia Rastani, and you dropped some crazy science about Bitcoin. And there you go. Then you were on again with Simon Dixon, talking about crowdfunding.
Yeah.
And now you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. And the Bitcoin story has grown since we talked about it. And
what is the state of Bitcoin right now?
Well, it got to this great market cap of 6 billion, 7 billion. And then the core developers are now deciding how to scale Bitcoin. So there's some contention in the community about how to scale Bitcoin. Meanwhile, another crypto coin, Ethereum, has breached the $1 billion market cap. And some other of these crypto coins are doing very well too. So the entire crypto coin universe is very, very healthy. And I think the Bitcoin is set to do a halving in July. And my opinion is that the miners are trying to squeeze out every last penny they possibly can before this event in July. And then they'll resolve this issue, and then it'll be back to the races on the price. But it's doing fine in terms of a payment system, and companies are attaching themselves to this, and a lot of what's going on in the payment structure. Since we talked last time, I think the big story is that the banks have gotten into blockchain.
Right.
They're competing with Bitcoin. The Bank of England just came up with something called RS coin, I think they call it, which is they made a statement this week about saying how Bitcoin is suffering from a Peter Pan syndrome. It can't grow up. And we at the Bank of England are going to come up with the real professional version. And so there's a real war developing, as I kind of predicted, because Bitcoin is a bank killer. It's a central bank killer. It destroys the need for 98% of all the functions of central banks and banks. And they had to respond. At first they mocked it.
Yeah.
Now they're coming back with their own versions, but they don't really understand the beauty of it. And so their versions are going to fail. And there are hundreds of thousands of jobs in the banking sector that are being lost. They'll continue to be lost this year, next year, the year after. And this is a seminal event in the history of finance, economics, and banking, the creation of this Bitcoin and blockchain technology. And we're now seeing how the whole industry is completely changing.
But it's really going to be the blockchain that's going to make the big difference, more than the Bitcoin itself, right or wrong?
Bitcoin is the biggest decentralized computer in the world, and it's the safest place to do these types of transactions. A blockchain that is, let's say, put out by the Bank of England is a private blockchain. It's a centralized blockchain. It's basically just a ledger. It's just having a big, a ledger that's being shared by a bunch of banks, which is fine. It does save on their cost, but it's not safe. Bitcoin is safe. Their products are not safe, so that's why they're going to lose in the end.
Company called TransferWise, one of our own shortage companies, foreign currency disruptor, billion market cap. Andreessen Horowitz are on the board over here. When you see something like that going after the banks and trying to disrupt the banks, what do you make of it?
Well, when I was on Newsnight, I think it was 2 years ago, there was a Forex company along with me, somebody from a Forex company, I forget the name, but I'm not going to even mention the name. But I made the point then that they were going to have their lunch eaten, that they were going to be put out of business, or they had to transform their business model. It's going to be totally disrupted by this technology, and this is what's happening. So yeah, I mean, that's right. All of these fintech startups, and TransferWise is a good example, and other companies are stepping in, and they're now gobbling up the market for sending money around the world for remittances, which is a huge market. They're taking all that business, all the transfer of funds, interbank and interbusiness are being gobbled up and disrupted, if you will. So it's a big change coming. You were in financial services. For example, you know that when you do a trade on Wall Street, you have trade plus settlement date, which when I started on Wall Street, it was 5 days. Then it was 3 days. And I think it still is 3 days. With a transaction on a blockchain, on Bitcoin, the trade is the confirmation. There is no waiting for a confirmation. It is the confirmation. That's the trade is the confirmation. That means all those support systems, all that back office that tracks all that chain of movement of the capital, all that is completely obliviated.
Right. And that means all the jobs are gone, and the banking sector doesn't want that, so they're resisting it. So
their margins, the banking margins are going to crash as a result. I mean, all those fees that banks charge, a fee to go to the ATM machine, a fee on a remittance, to send $100 or $200 might be $10, $15. There's just an outrageous fee. So all that, but that's cash money. That is the only real cash that these banks make. All their other businesses of packaging securities and reselling securities and all this other type of stuff is really phantom business. There's no cash behind it. It's all credit. It's all on credit and derivatives, credit on credit on credit. The only cash that they actually have are the cash they're taking every time you go to the ATM machine and take £5 from you. You're trying to get 100 pounds out of the bank. That's the only cash the bank ever sees. Everything else is phantom. It's the shadow banking system. It's illusory. It doesn't exist. But they, through accounting, creative accounting, let's call it, et cetera, they make a business out of it. But with blockchain, with Bitcoin, all of the hologram, that is the banking system, evaporates in the flick of a switch.
Last time you were here, you talked about Bernanke, you talked about HSBC laundering money, you talked about Wachovia doing the same. What makes Max Keiser angry these days? You report on the financial business every day of the week, really, like 3 days a week. So what pisses you off these days?
Well, I'm happy to see that hundreds of thousands of bankers are losing their job. I mean, I feel like we're succeeding because we brought in and we pushed Bitcoin around the world. Whenever I go around the world, people stop me and say, I know about Bitcoin because of your show, and I loaded it up on the boat when it was $5 a coin, $10 a coin, $20 a coin, and it has made a real material impact on people's lives all over the world. And bankers have lost their jobs, which is fantastic. We have now Startcoin, which is a crypto coin that I created, and we pre-mined millions of these coins, and we give those coins away to people who are doing crowdfunding. As you mentioned, StartJoin is a crowdfunding site, and we have our own coin, Startcoin. And so we have now projects in Zimbabwe, in Botswana, in Volgograd, Russia. Somebody in Volgograd just did a project. They raised $200 for a party. Half of that we were able to finance using the free coins that we have. And that makes a lot. Actually, that's a big sum of money in Volgograd, where I have learned that the average monthly salary is $50 a month. So for $200, this guy had the best party of the year. It was fantastic, and he's spreading the message there. So crypto in Africa is huge because they're leapfrogging the banking system as we know it. The branch system, the system we grew up knowing, is being leapfrogged into a new 21st century model of it's all mobile payments and cryptocurrencies. And so in Kenya, for example, is completely wired up with mobile payments and crypto, and that's spreading over Africa rapidly, and there's a huge growth area. In areas where you have an entrenched oligopoly, like in the UK or in New York, they're resistant. Yeah. But in other places of the world, it's taking off. And so this is bringing enormous change and good change, positive change. And our show goes out all over the world. I just found out we've got now 35 million viewers. RT gets 70 million viewers a week, 35 million people watch it a day. That's at about where the BBC is at 75 million viewers a day. But
worldwide,
we
right.
got there in 10 years. So in another 2 or 3 years, we're going to be well past the BBC, the most watched network in the world. Our show, 3 times a week, we get 30, 40 million viewers a week, and it goes out to 100 countries or more. And people are now got the crypto message, and they're being empowered by that crypto message.
You've been a tireless advocate for crypto for a long time. When you were in Prague at the cryptocurrency convention 5 years ago?
2011.
2011.
That's
and
right.
You've been talking about it ever since. I also remember you were here 2 years ago and you said, Brian, television is alive and well, and it will be, I think you said 10 or 20 years. I have to go back to that episode. And I actually believed you, even though, we're broadcast on YouTube. Yes, we're on London Live Television every morning now, 7 a.m.
I got up special just to watch it.
You do. Thank you very much.
The London Live show.
Thank you. Or you could just come
Fantastic.
over here.
I've seen some of the episodes, but I watch them 2 or 3 times. That's the thing about this show. Sometimes you have to watch episodes more than once to get the full impact.
I appreciate that. You're an advocate for London Real, too. But you told me TV was still going to be a factor. Do you still feel that way? What is the future of television? RT is obviously going into so many different markets and doing investigative journalism.
Well, what's TV? TV is video, and video is becoming bigger than ever. Facebook is huge in video now. They're challenging YouTube, and they made it a point to challenge YouTube with video. Video is becoming huge. If you go on your Twitter, timeline, you see now videos, all those little videos coming up. So video is never going to stop being incredibly powerful, and television, as such, longer form. We do a half-hour show, is going to continue to be very powerful. It's a very powerful medium, and so that's not going. It's not going away.
And you were in Moscow recently to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of RT. I remember watching RT, I think back in 06, 07. There used to be black cabs with the RT on the side of it early on. What was it like being there? Putin was in the house.
That's right. Yeah.
What's it like doing business with the Russians? And you've been associated with RT for so long and traveling
Well,
there.
I mean, I'll give you some anecdotal,
Yeah.
Stories. We did some of our shows in Moscow, in the studios in Moscow, and so typically when we do our show, if we do it in London or New York, and we have directors, camera people, and the show is somewhat formal in that there's a process that goes on in terms of there's a countdown, 5, 4, it's a certain standard way of doing things. I noticed in Moscow it's kind of amusing because so we're getting ready to do the show, and so I'm just looking up, I'm like, to the director, I'm like, so are we going to count down, right? And then there's a few second pause, and then I hear, go. So, this was very, to me, I thought, encapsulated my experience there. It's like people just get on with it, and there's very little fuss. It's a people that have become very good at being very precise with their language and their movements, and there's no frill, there's no waste.
Right.
And we're seeing that played out on the world stage, where Putin, in the Syria conflict, he seems to be operating from a completely different plane of professionalism, where he goes in, he cleans it up, he kills a lot of ISIS guys, and now he's leaving. Before the U.S. really had a chance to even to formulate a plan. Cameron and the UK are still like wincing, and they're not sure what to do,
Right.
and they're Cameron is there with his handbag swishing about. He's just such a poor excuse for a human being. But then here the Russians are like, we go in, we clean it up a bit, now we're gone, we're done.
Yeah.
That's it. We don't need. It's not a big deal. We got to go do other stuff.
It's like Putin isn't worried about the popularity contest. He's not checking public opinion probably all the time. He goes in and does the job.
Well, he's got an 85% approval rating.
Yeah.
Now, people say that sounds
real?
That sounds crazy.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that when Putin came on, the GDP of Russia was about 150, 200 billion dollars, and recently that got up to $2 trillion GDP. That's backed off with the oil back, to the 1.5, 1.6 trillion. But that's democratized. That's all around the country. So people, they started off on a low base. Okay, that's true. They might be making $50 a month, but suddenly they're making $250, $300, or they're going from 2,000 to 5,000 or 6,000. That's a huge difference. Those people, they're loving it. They had an enormous economic boom. under this Putin tenure, and so they're very pleased with this. So it's real. The economic activity is real. Now that it's a different. It's a kind of a different. We're trying to get a handle on it because there was the Soviet era which collapsed, then there was the Yeltsin era which was a catastrophe. Then there's the Putin era, which became, because the oil, of course, was very high in price, it became bling, and over-the-top bling, and I think it's okay to say it became a bit vulgar. But then you had this price come down, and the economy is turning inward. So you have they're not taking any imports, for example, French cheese. So they're developing a domestic cheese market.
I heard the domestic cheese is pretty bad.
It's not French cheese, but it's
okay.
It's moving. They're moving merchandise, and it's a big retail market. It's a diversified economy. It's not just oil and gas. It's the biggest actually retail by volume of any country in Europe. It's huge, I believe. Maybe Germany and Russia similar, but it's a very huge retail component of the economy. And so they were able to. We went to this restaurant called Latva, I believe. My Russian's not too good, and but it was all like this idea of farm to table, farm to plate. It's kind of it's becoming hipster. So I mean, I did this interview with this guy, and he's got this long beard, and I'm thinking, wow, this guy's a hipster. But then I remembered that this is the style in Russia for hundreds of years. This is nothing. This is not really hipster. This is the way it's been for hundreds of years.
Right. Oil prices are down. Do you ever worry if they're running out of money, they're going to cut RT funding and be like, this is a luxury we can't afford because it's funded by the government? So is that ever a concern?
Well, first of all, every international news organization is funded by the corresponding government.
BBC?
BBC, France 24, Press TV, Al Jazeera. In the U.S., you would say, well, it's not government funded. However, it is the tie to the government we're seeing during this election cycle where Donald Trump can become a presidential contender because the media in the U.S. has been exposed as completely state-driven and defense spending and Pentagon-driven. Any Pentagon official who's got weapons to sell can walk onto Fox News at any time and make a case for war. Okay, so that's not technically a state-sponsored media outlet, but it's a Pentagon pet propaganda outlet, and these guys function as such. So there's very little news that goes on, and now we're seeing what happens when someone like a Donald Trump comes along who's completely self-funded. He doesn't need the money from the special interests, from the Pentagon, and he just like picks these guys off. It's like Mark Rubio. He just knocks them down like flies. He just swats at them because there's nothing there. They're all empty suits who represent huge money behind them, who you never hear about, but they control the media. And there's Trump. He's just like a wrecking ball, just getting rid of all the nonsense. So, for this reason, I think it's very important that America goes through this. I think Trump, he looks like he's got the nomination for a Republican candidate. Hillary Clinton is a very, 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 very bad person who should not be anywhere near the White House. So, I think we're going to see President Trump.
All right, so just to finish on that point, you're saying all media companies have state influence. So whether RT is owned by Russia and whether the money's there, that's one issue.
Well,
and then the US is highly influenced.
where the funding comes from is one question, but do they have a say in editorial content? The only state outlet that has, I've observed, exercised censorship and editorial restrictions is the BBC. When I did my show for the BBC, they were by far the most draconian in their censorship and restrictions on what I was presenting on my show. By far, no one came close. Their concept of impartiality is like Fox News' concept of fair and balanced. When you see Fox News and it says fair and balanced, that's utter balderdash. It's not. It's completely one-sided, heavily biased propaganda. When you see the BBC use a word like impartial, you should understand you should erase that and put propaganda. They're the least impartial of any network I've ever worked with.
Right, and so RT's head and shoulders above the rest of those when it comes to being partial.
The two outlets that I've found complete editorial freedom are Press TV out of Tehran, and RT.
Right.
RT, they're busy building the network. They assume that journalists know how to be journalists. That's what they bring them in for. You're the journalist. Be a journalist. Our job is to build the business, build the network. So our job is not to look over your shoulder all day and waste everybody's time. And that's why they're going to be the biggest in the world, because they're just very straightforward business people. They understand the internet brilliantly. They were the first to really embrace social media, the first news organization with 1 billion views on YouTube.
YouTube, yeah.
Right? And you met Ira Crotty, who's their online guy.
Very switched in, very plugged in.
Totally gets the entire new media space and has just done a remarkable job. They empower people to do good work, and the people are doing great work. It's great to be part of the team.
Yeah, no, it's good. There's a Russian poet that once said, "You cannot understand Russia with your mind." But we'll get back to that. Let's talk Trump. Did you ever see this coming with Trump being this popular? I had a guest on today, Simon Sinek, very famous TED speaker, and he said, Brian, people watch TV, they don't listen to it. And that's true. I want to see the Trump spectacle. And the more I watch Trump, the other day I caught myself going, that makes sense, actually. And I'm buying in more to Trump as the time goes on. What's your read on him?
Well, I did not see the success that he would enjoy. And I think now what I understand is that he, as a businessman, knew instinctively he could cobble together a coalition from people that didn't want Social Security changed. So that made him head and shoulders more likable than any other Republican.
Right.
And he's pro-trade.
Right.
Which makes him head and shoulders above any Democrat, like Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is not fair trade, or she's not pro-wages, pro-jobs trade. She's pro-entrenched oligopolies and monopolies and NAFTA and CAFTA and TTIP. So he has that huge Democratic demographics of wage or job, blue collar, let's say. And he has the Republican people who don't want to touch Social Security. So you put those two together, and you have an incredibly large demographic to build your presidential aspirations upon. And this is working. So he's now a Republican nominee.
Yeah.
So so that's gone. He'll probably take John Kasich, who's the governor from Ohio, I guess it is,
okay,
and bring him on as a VP.
Okay.
So that combination looks really like a winner. Hillary Clinton, is going to have a really, really hard battle, and I think in the end she loses that battle. But I also envision her bringing in every frickin' lawyer in Washington to every dirty trick that would make Richard Nixon blush. She's Richard Nixon on steroids.
So Trump wins the election. That Keiser's predicting on this show.
I think in a fair election, he would win a fair election.
I think America ultimately loves a winner. They love a great businessman. They love a guy that exudes success. I think he crafted this campaign very intelligently. Some articles coming out in the New York Times about how this was thought through for years and tested, and he knows he's pro-gun. He's great demographics, and it's fascinating to watch.
The big winner in this is the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution is an idiot-proof document. You just follow the directions. Just do what the Constitution says. Don't do special signing orders. Don't reinterpret the Constitution. It's not yours to envision what it says. Just do what it says. That's what the founders came up with. It's government by and for the people. That was the innovation. It's the people that run the government, not the other way around. That's what the American Constitution is all about. It's designed.
The blockchain technology of the time.
Well, it distributes the power in a way where you have checks and balances. So you have the three major branches of government, then you have a free press, which is the fourth estate, the fourth branch of government. These things act as checks and balances so that you don't have and the Second Amendment, which gives gun rights, is there to arm the people if they need to take out a tyrant. If a tyrant, people say, well, what if Trump is a new Hitler? Well, to go to the Second Amendment, it says if in fact somebody takes over the government and ignores the Constitution, it's your responsibility as an American to go get your gun, go to Washington, and shoot him. Essentially, that's what the Constitution says. That's what it's there for, to arm the people against a tyrant taking over the government. That's the purpose of it. That's why it's codified as such. Okay, it's not about having concealed carry at the 7-Eleven to impress some teenager working there, with your huge piece. That's not what the Second Amendment's all about. People can leave all their guns at home. They should train the people to use their guns like they do in Switzerland. Everyone has a gun in Switzerland, but they also have to be licensed. They have to be trained, right?
Yeah, leave them at home. Yeah.
But they're there because they need for national defense, because they've had this history of neutrality, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But in the U.S., okay, there are the Second Amendment, there's guns. So if you think that there's a risk that Trump can be a fascist dictator, well, there's an app for that.
Shoot him.
It's called the Second Amendment.
All right, you're celebrating the 1,000th episode of Keiser Report right around election time this year.
Right on election day.
That's exciting, Max. Very exciting.
Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way. You guys run an amazing show. I went there, super professional, great set. You and Stacey cranked them out. You guys pretty much create that show between the two of you, which is massive. You still do a radio show as well.
Yes, we do. A weekly show on Residence 104.4 here in London. We've been doing that for over 10 years, and we just started putting them on YouTube.
Okay.
So we were putting them on some archive site, but now we're putting them on YouTube that people can actually listen to them. But that show, we've been doing that show for 10 years. And the thing that show, we shoot our show as live in the studio. And Stacey does basically all the prep and all the writing, and she does all the editing, but we don't really do any editing because we shoot it as live. But we do work out ideas for the show on our radio show. You can hear on the podcast, we're coming up with ideas. It's actually kind of a rehearsal, that podcast. And then when we shoot the TV show during the week, sometimes we'll be like, we just did this on our podcast type of thing. It's kind of like
So it's a perfect, it complements your show.
Yeah.
Because you can work out stuff kind of like a community.
Yeah, I come up with, some, especially some, some bits, sometimes it's, some bits we've happened during the podcast first, if you will, to kind of.
Fast forward 5 years, your 2000th episode, perhaps. What is Max Keiser doing in 2021? What are you doing? What does your day look like?
I'm hoping to become, and Stacey shares this vision.
Secretary of State for Donald Trump.
We're looking to just become utter nomads and just have no fixed address and just travel the world and do our show. By that time, the technology will be so advanced. We do a lot of our shows on the road on our phones.
Literally.
On the phone.
Max was telling me this earlier, on the iPhone 6.
Yep.
With mics into the iPhone.
Yep.
That's incredible.
And we do interviews. And so you don't need to bring in a crew. You don't need camera people. You just show up, you go right into the action, shoot an interview. You can edit online on your laptop, on an app, and just cut it together and send it off to broadcast. So the technology is getting better and better. When we started, the technology was nowhere near that. When we started before YouTube was even introduced. It's funny because our podcast, there's an introduction to the podcast from a radio show that we did 11 years ago before there was something called YouTube, but it's still introducing the show. Like it's an artifact from ancient times, but it's still built into the audio of the show. But I remember going to a conference once, people were discussing vlogging, video blogging, and they said, you know what, we're gonna go, it's like a blog, but we're gonna put on video, and then we're gonna put that video online. And like this was a whole vlogging community, and then YouTube came around, and it was like, okay, well, that's no longer a vlogging community, is there? But we've been doing this a long, long time now, in retrospect, and these technologies are changing quite rapidly. So in the broadcast space with the cameras, and then with the sound is always the most difficult, actually, to capture good sound in these environments. So the sound is very good, and we can just basically just be totally mobile.
Just travel the world, any city you want. You already go to lots of different cities.
Yeah, we just go to more and more cities.
Okay,
we're constantly traveling.
All right, so you do that. And what does the Keiser Report look like then? Are you still the watchdog of the financial world, the watchdog of governments, just calling things out when people refuse to?
Well, yeah, the focus of the Keiser Report is to track how the global economy, banks, and finance are evolving or falling apart, and what's happening from a perspective of the point of view that it's different than CNBC because they are on permanent cheerleader call. Their idea is that up markets are good, down markets are bad. That's kind of like their whole, that's the focus of the business press. But that's ludicrous, because like saying red lights are bad and green lights are good. No, you need both the red lights and green lights. That's to understand how the flow of traffic. So a down market is not bad. It means that you have to look at what's happening in that down market. You know, what impact is it having, and who's responsible for that down market, and report on that, not in a way to try to cover somebody's butt and saying, well, we all know that the reason the markets are down are because such and such a bank committed massive fraud, or long-term capital management committed massive fraud. You know, we shouldn't. It's no point sugarcoating that and hide that truth from people's consciousness, which is what you find in mainstream media. They do everything they can to protect. There's a protected class in the world called bankers, and they commit incredible fraud and what used to be called moral hazard. You know, going back, you were in the business. There's a thing called moral hazard. You know, what does that mean? It means that we are willing to accept a certain degree of wiggle room or chicanery or fraud, because that's the price you pay for liquidity. You know, markets operate 24/7. They're liquid. You can get a market order done at the market. But to keep the markets open like that, we have to allow little, bad acting by some folks. You know, the specialist system itself is actually a license to print money, because the specialist who's making these markets sees orders.
Inside information.
Yeah, they see orders before they arrive.
Yeah.
But now you have high frequency trading.
Yeah.
Which is 80 to 90% of all the volume, and it's based on insider trading. So insider trading, or what used to be called moral hazard, is now the dominant theme in these markets, and what's left is moral legitimacy. So moral legitimacy is less than 10% of the markets, less than 5% of the markets. The rest is moral hazard or moral illegitimacy or outright fraud. So it's the tails wagging the dog. Fraud is the dominant theme that generates all this price discovery, which is almost entirely incorrect. Assets are being mispriced all over the world in all different markets, and it's all being fed by cheap rates. Now, once cheap rates reverse, as they will do, just as night follows day, as
when's the next recession? We're at 7 years now.
The recession's already happening amongst millions of people. The employment participation rate in America is never been lower. The wages are flat to stagnant. Food stamps rolls are incredible. In America, you have an incredible 100 million or more either at or below the poverty line. So you have an enormous gap between the top and the bottom, and the bottom is now getting angry, and this is dangerous. So the folks, my thought about this, Brian, is that in America, everyone for years, I grew up in America, I know the American way. America, there's that expression, fake it till you make it. It's like, it's a nation of hustlers, it's like, but, there was always opportunity, the American dream. There was always opportunity, anyone can make it. But now, because of the recent events, the last 10 or 15 years, that's not true anymore. If you're born into poverty, you're going to stay in poverty, and you probably end up in jail. The reason for this is, I'll give you my theory. I think it all goes back to 9/11. In 9/11 was such a shocking event for the wealthy and the elite that they started to take their money out of the system. And then in 2008 was a liquidity crisis. I think there is currently a liquidity crisis. That's why these central banks are printing and they're lowering rates, because the rich they're not playing anymore. They're like, you know what? I had friends in those buildings, and I'm not going to play this game anymore. I'm just taking my marbles and I'm going home. I don't want to be a part of the system anymore. And so liquidity is being isolated in these silos of huge wealth. It could be property in London, for example. An oligarch pays 100 million pounds for a property. That money is dead. It's not circulating in the economy. It's not causing any kind of economic growth. That's dead money. If you put your money, $180 million for a Modigliani, okay, that's on the wall. it's dead money. That's not doing anything. Banks who can take this quantitative easing and put it on deposit at a central bank and get a positive spread, that's not circulating. Money velocity is almost at all-time lows. So in part because I think that the wealthy are scared. And 9/11, I think, kicked it all off. It was quite shocking, especially it's the media capital of the world. I worked on Wall Street, and it's a shocking event in ways that I don't think people have fully understood how it worked in the economy. The central banker at the time, Alan Greenspan, dropped rates back down to 1%, below 1%. So they flooded the system with money. That's true. But what happened was you ended up with this huge wealth and income gap, because I think that there was a genuine fear factor in a large percentage of the super wealthy that are simply saying, you know what, I don't want to be part of this anymore.
Just taking their money out of the system. We're out of time. Final thoughts. Max Keiser. What does Max do for fun?
This is the funnest thing I've done in weeks.
And final thought. Where do you get your multicolored trousers?
I got these at Hugo Boss during a Christmas sale 3 years ago for 50 pounds. These are Hugo Boss. I had a red, yellow, and green.
I've seen the yellow,
Yeah.
the Hamburglar pants. Max Keiser, you can hear more about this stuff on the Keiser Report on RT 3 times a week. Twitter, you're very active. Stacy's there as well. I love it. I really enjoyed the time that I was on your show. It was pivotal for me.
Well, come back.
I would love to, and please come back here. We're next door. Max Keiser,
What?
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for being
Dude.
on Real Talk.
Excellent.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
We're out of here.